So now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Giovanni Maciocia, who holds a master's degree actually in economics, which was new information to me, and I think that's really wonderful. But he has a bachelor's in acupuncture from the International College of Oriental Medicine in England, and he's practiced in England since 1974. I think many of you who have, been students, are very familiar with Giovanni, because all of our textbooks, my Foundations of Chinese Medicine was my absolute first book, and that became, this highlighted conglomerate of notes and became really my foundation for understanding Chinese medicine. He's had several other books, Tongue Diagnosis, The Practice of Chinese Medicine, and that wonderful, large red covered book, the OBGYN. We've all used his books, and he has been such an influence on our practices over the last 30 years. So please welcome Dr. Giovanni Maciocia. Is it okay that I called you doctor? Is it okay?
Thank you, Gina.
Thank you.
This is my 20th anniversary of Pacific Symposium. 20 years. Yeah. I'll never forget the first time I was here, because I came with my son, who was 5 at the time. He's 25 now. And he had whooping cough. He'd had whooping cough the whole winter, and we nearly canceled the trip because he was still coughing. And then I decided, well, let's go. And within 3 days, that was here, coming from England, his cough had gone completely. So I thought, I must move here. I must leave England. And I've actually fulfilled that dream 20 years later, because I actually now live here in California, in Santa Barbara, for only the past 2 years. So it took me a long time to make that step, but better late than never. So the subject today and this afternoon is spirits in Chinese medicine. Why am I talking about this? Because the past 10 years probably, my interest has been in this field, and that the result of it has been my latest book on the psyche. And my interest has taken me in various directions. One was to read everything I could about Shen, Hun, and Po in Chinese books, which is very little, in fact. 2 is to also read about the emotions as they were discussed in Western philosophy. And I was amazed to discover that every Western philosopher, from Plato to Sartre, talked about emotions. What is the function of the emotions? Where do they arise from? And the other direction of my research has been the study of Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism, the influence of these schools on Chinese medicine. And that's been a very strong direction of research. And I read the most obscure books about the concept of self in the later Han Dynasty in China or something like that. But it is fascinating. And one of my theses is that we overemphasize the role of Taoism on Chinese medicine and underemphasize that of Confucianism. And I believe that Confucianism had a huge influence on Chinese medicine, more than modern Marxism-Leninism, in fact. And by the way, that's my Chinese name there, that one, Ma Wanli. It's a great name because it sounds nice. There's a nice rhythm, Ma Wanli. And the meaning is nice too, because that's a horse, that's 10,000, and that's miles. So it's a horse of 10,000 miles. It's a strong horse. And in China, in Nanjing, my friends call me, when you're familiar with someone in China, you call them, if they're old, they call them old Ma. So everyone in Nanjing calls me Lao Ma. Old Ma. This is a Gothic cathedral, which I use here as an example of very harmonious architecture, harmonious lines, geometric architecture. Everything in that building is Gothic architecture, is a one style of architecture. It's actually Köln Cathedral in Germany. And we think Chinese medicine is like that. A beautiful, harmonious building with a homogeneous architecture. And in reality, Chinese medicine is more like that. Many of the things we read in the books, and this afternoon we'll go through some of them, even within one chapter of the Neijing, even within one paragraph sometimes, some of the things they say are Taoist, and some of the things they say are Confucianist. And many of the Confucianist things they say do not really apply to us, because the sense of self in Confucian philosophy is completely different than our Western sense of self. Many of the things that they say about emotions, for example, do not necessarily apply to us. Just to give you one quick example, anger is overemphasized, in my opinion, as a cause of disease, both in China and the West. In China, when they give you a list of emotions, there's always anger at the top. Anger, right? And in the West too. Why do they overemphasize it? In my opinion, because anger is the most disruptive of the emotions from the Confucian point of view. Because Confucianism is all about a system of ethics in family and society where everyone has a certain role and duties and responsibilities. And if everyone follows their duties according to their roles, there is harmony in family and society. And anger disrupts this harmony. If you're sad, because anger leads you to rebel. If you're sad or you grieve, you don't rebel. So anger is the most disruptive emotion from the Confucian point of view. Indeed, it's amazing. In Chinese medicine, when we use, for example, with liver yang rising, it's counterflow of qi. Qi is going the wrong way, right? In Chinese, it's called ni. If you look at the character for ni, it has very strong political connotations. Ni, when the liver yang is ni, it means to rebel, to disobey, to defy, to go against. It's not a medical problem, it's an ethical problem. And indeed, the treatment method for ni is shun. If you look at the word shun, which is the treatment method, in the Chinese books you will say, liver yang rising, these are the symptoms. Treatment principle, shun qi, make qi go the right way. If you look at the meaning of shun, is to conform, to obey. So it's a political thing, it's not, and not a medical thing. And yes, anger, of course, is an emotional cause of disease. It is common, but it is overemphasized due to the Confucian influence in Chinese medicine. And that's why we don't necessarily have to take it as being right. In my experience, far more common and more deep, lasting emotions that we see in our patients are sadness and grief from separation and loss, and worry and guilt. I would say these four: sadness and grief from separation, worry and guilt. Anyway, we're not here to talk about emotions. These are the three schools of thought which influenced Chinese medicine the most. And they all arose at the same time. There must have been amazing times, the Warring States period, which was from about 476 to 221 BC. And these are the three major schools with quite opposite views of human nature. And the first one is the Confucian school, who believed that human nature is essentially good. And that's why Confucius didn't even believe in punishment. He didn't believe in punishing people, but he believed in re-education, which interestingly they use in communist China, re-education. And by contrast, the legalist school believed that human nature is essentially bad. It can only be controlled by strict laws and harsh punishments. Notice the absence here of the Buddhist school because they came much later. So we're talking here about very early times, the Warring States period. And those are the three major philosophers. That's Confucius, that's Lao Tzu, and that's Han Feizi, the representative of the legalist school. Which incidentally, in my opinion, the legalist school also had quite a big influence on Chinese medicine, which is completely unrecognized. Why do I think that? Because the Chinese medicine sees it's a system of metaphors. There are many metaphors in Chinese medicine. One, as we will see today and this afternoon, is the metaphor of evil spirits, which is a very important part of Chinese medicine. The other metaphor is a political metaphor. The state and the ministers and the government. The heart is the emperor. The lung is the prime minister. That's Confucian. We don't have to take it as gold nuggets. You know what I mean? For me, the emperor is not the heart, it's the kidneys. Or some people might say it's the stomach and spleen. That's partly a Confucianist idea, and very much so also a legalist idea. Why legalist? Because these school of thought, this philosophy here, influenced the very first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi, the guy who built the Terracotta Army. And he's the one who unified China for the first time. Therefore, there was a central government. And hence the political metaphor that occurs a lot in Chinese medicine if you read the Neijing. The heart is the emperor, the lung is the prime minister, the gallbladder is the minister of justice, the triple burner, by the way, is the minister of ditches and irrigation and canals, because at that time also they unified the system of canals in China and unified roads for the first time. What does roads remind you of? The channels. The theory of the channels arose all at that time. A system of roads. For the first time, China was unified by a system of roads, and the first emperor of China had a huge road building program. And they were really like freeways because they were 11.5 yards wide. That's enough for about 4 chariots. So not by chance, the idea of channels arose more or less around the same time. But moreover, I think that many of the methods we use are actually legalist methods. They are not Taoist. Why do I say that? Because what do we do in Chinese medicine? I think we use harsh punishments and strict laws, like these people. If it's hot, cool it down. If it's cold, burn it with moxa. If you have a pathogenic factor, expel it. We use purging, sweating, and vomiting as treatment methods. We use needles to get the evil spirits out. That's the origin of acupuncture. We use moxa to burn people. Our approach is very legalist. I wouldn't call it Taoist. I would say the naturopathic philosophy is very Taoist. Let nature take its course, do the minimum, follow the feminine principle, let the body heal itself, etc. There's nowhere in the Neijing that says, if you have a pathogenic factor, let the body heal itself. Never. It says, if you have a pathogenic factor, expel it. You've got phlegm, resolve phlegm. Okay? So I think the influence of the legalist school is very much underestimated. Just in closing on this subject, one important thing I'd like to point out to you, why we overemphasize Taoism. not always, when you read in Chinese books and in the Neijing a reference to Tao, it doesn't always mean that it's Taoist. Because Confucius talked about the Tao all the time. All the time. The Tao, the idea of Tao, the way, is not exclusive to Taoism. So you may read the word Tao in the Neijing, you think it's Taoist, oh, it's so beautiful, Tao, yin and yang, the 5 elements, but it may not be Taoist. Okay? So that's an important consideration. Of course, Taoism does have a very strong influence on Chinese medicine, especially in collateral aspects of Chinese medicine, sexual practices, for example, sexual hygiene, also diet, exercises, qigong, etc. This is a passage from that philosopher of the legalist school, and notice here he's having a dig at Confucianists, and it's very interesting to read how they criticized each other. He talks about these are typical Confucian qualities, Ren, Yi. Confucius talks about these all the time, Ren and Yi. And notice what he says. These people speak only of Ren and Yi, kindness and love, and their states are destroyed and they perish. The ruler is disgraced. I will thus make clear that benevolence, righteousness, kindness, and love are not worthy of use. But by means of severe punishments and heavy penalties, one can order the state. A complete opposite views of how to order the state. And look what Confucius say in answer to this. It's very interesting. This is on shame. He's talking about shame, the emotion of shame. He says you can lead people with administrative injunctions, like the legalists do, and keep them orderly with laws, with penal law, and they will avoid punishment, but they will be without a sense of shame. Lead them with morality, notice the use of this the Tao Te Ching, that's not Taoist. Notice the Tao Te, this is the same Te as in the Tao Te Ching. And keep them orderly through observing ritual propriety, and they will develop a sense of shame, and they will order themselves. In other words, he was using shame as a way of controlling people for an orderly society. And that's why shame is such an important emotion in Eastern societies, whereas in Western societies, probably more guilt than shame. Although I think in the West, we have both. In China, usually there is shame, not so much guilt. Okay, so why are we talking about the Gui? Because I believe that the Gui is an essential part of our psyche, in short. And there are many different ways of looking at the Gui. You can look at the Gui literally as a spirit or ghost, which is very interesting. It is definitely part of Chinese medicine. Unschuld, if you read his books, you know Unschuld, he criticizes us because he says that we use a sanitized version of Chinese medicine. We have removed this huge part of Chinese medicine, of Gui and spirits. And we use a kind of a sanitized version of it. It's true, I agree. From that point of view, I agree with him. The concept of spirits and ghosts is very, very strong. It's very much part of Chinese medicine. My answer to that, the criticism that we use a sanitized version of Chinese medicine, my answer would be, so what? What's wrong with that? So we're going to look at briefly at Gui literally as spirits or ghosts, and secondly, Gui as a movement of Hunan Po. And we'll do the rest in the afternoon. And in the afternoon, we'll also talk about practical aspects of this. So it won't be completely esoteric. There will be some interesting practical applications with both acupuncture and herbal medicine. So Gui is this one. This is the card for Gui. And it sees basically the soul of a dead person. It's the body, the soul of a dead person without a body that flows to heaven after death. A very important consideration. Heaven here has nothing to do with the Christian heaven. Okay. Also, These ideas are very ancient, nothing to do with Buddhism, reincarnation, or karma. Nothing. These ideas go back to 2000 BC, long before even Buddha was born, long before. This is before Taoism, Confucianism, Legos, before anything. But amazing, these ideas, as we will see also in the afternoon, are very much alive even today, as we will see. There are some practices in some rural parts of China which show how these ideas are very much alive. The idea that after death, the soul survives. And the old character for this thing here, was that. That's the head of a dead person, this one. And these two squiggles is the movement of this soul without a body after death. And believe it or not, these two squiggles have a very important clinical significance in the Hun, in the nature of the Hun, because they indicate the movement of this soul after death. And from a psychological point of view, an essential nature of the Hun is its movement. The Hun is always moving, searching, planning, ideas, etc., as we will see in a moment. Originally, this was neither good nor bad. It's not necessarily an evil spirit. It's just the spirit of a dead person that survives after death. And there is the community of the dead and the community of the living, and they communicate. That's why Chinese people have a very strong sense of ancestors' cult. You have to behave ethically also so that your ancestors are not displeased. This is a very strong idea even now. And the Buddhists, by the way, use this term to indicate the hungry pretas much later on. They use this word, gui, to indicate the hungry pretas. If you know, the hungry pretas are in the lower, if you remember the wheel of life, in the lower part there is the three lower states of existence. The animals, the hell, and the hungry pretas. And the hungry pretas are little spirits which have a very big belly, which makes them always hungry, but very, very thin throat, so the food doesn't go down. So it's a very miserable existence. And even now, in Thailand, people put food out for the hungry pretas. Even now, in modern Thailand, they put food out for these hungry pretas. And the Buddhists use that name, gui, to indicate that. And to show you the importance, how much they believed that the person survives, the soul survives after death, important people had little figurines put in their graves. By the way, as a substitution for putting real people in their graves, which they did as well. The first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huangdi, the guy who built the terracotta army, had all his concubines buried alive with him because he needed them after life as well. Even now in China, it's very bad. If a man dies a bachelor, it's terrible because he has no one to look after him in the afterlife. It's a terrible thing. And in the old times, if a young man dies as a bachelor, for example, in an accident, they would try and find a young woman who died recently to put the body in his grave. It just shows you how rooted these ideas are. And these beautiful figurines actually are from the tomb of Ma Wangtui. I don't know if you've heard of it. Have you heard of it? Very important for us because of the acupuncture books that were in those tombs. Very important. Actually, they were not books, they were bamboo strips. But it was the tomb of important people of the Changsha dynasty. This is before China was unified. No, in the Han dynasty. So they had all these figurines put in, cooks. These are musicians to entertain them after death. And food. This is actually the tray that was found. That's what it looked like when they found it in the tomb. And that's what it looks like now. It looks amazing. I actually took these pictures. There is in Santa Barbara at the moment an exhibition of this stuff. The actual objects from the tombs, from the Marwan tree tombs. They are from those times. That's the Western Han Dynasty. And this is a cosmetic set for this lady who died for her afterlife. Just to show you how rooted these ideas are, the ideas of the Gui surviving after death. And this is her coffin. And it's very interesting for me because basically depicts Hunan Po. And notice this swirling movement. It goes back to the movement of the Hunan Po. The Gui is always moving. And the Gui, as we see in a moment, is part of the characters for Hunan Po. So Hunan Po have a nature of Gui. And they're always moving. And that's why they have this swirling movement. And if you notice, this frame here of the coffin is clearly divided into two parts. The upper part is the Hun that goes up after death. The Po goes back to earth after death. The Po is the animal soul which dies with the body. The Hun survives after death. And if you notice, there's a clear demarcation here. That's the Hun and that's the Po. We're going to look at that in the afternoon. That's the character, that's Min Hun. Min means burial. It also gives the idea of dark and hidden. And this is marriage. So that's afterlife marriage, basically, i.e. the practice of trying to find the body of a dead woman to put in a bachelor's grave. Min Hun. So, in the old times, Chinese medicine was based completely on Gui. And when I say old times, I mean 1000 BC, 1500 BC, and there were no doctors, just shamans. And that was the character for medicine. This is a quiver of arrows, this one here. This means to take out, and that is a shaman at the bottom. Interestingly, the way Chinese language works, this square here indicates work, gung, and these are two men. Not because there are two men, but because it's a man working very hard, so two men. So it's a shaman working very hard to take out the evil spirits with his arrows. It's like the character for shouting has three mouths. You know, one mouth speaks, three mouths shout, because shouting. That's how it works. Interestingly, later on, this character here, unfortunately, irritating, it doesn't come up. Later on, the character for medicine changed. This thing at the bottom here became that, herbal wine. So the shaman becomes a herbalist. And that happened around the Warring States period. A very important change in Chinese medicine, which is, which we can verify in the very first chapter of the Su Wen. Let's see if we can get that character. Yeah, you can see that clearly. See, the top part is the same, the arrows and the takeout, but here we have a shaman, there is a herbal wine. So the shaman becomes the doctor. Confucius, by the way, I usually dislike the Confucian philosophy quite a lot because I think it's perfect for repressive regimes. It's very regimented. Everyone has duties, responsibilities. There's even the 6 relationships, father and children, husband and wife, and the people at the top have a duty of care towards the people at the bottom, and the people at the bottom have a duty of obedience. And if everyone does that, there is harmony in the family and society. So the children obey the parents, the wife obeys the husband, the younger brother obeys the older brother, all the subjects obey the ruler, crucially, young friend obeys the old friend. Crucially, students obey the teacher. So the relationship between teacher and student is a wholly Confucian relationship. And that's why Chinese students, besides being very smart, also study very hard, because it's your duty towards your teachers and your parents. Incidentally, if you read the Analects of Confucius, it will help us to understand modern China too. It's all about duties and responsibilities. The word rights doesn't exist. We go on about human rights. It doesn't exist. Everyone has duties and responsibilities, and if everyone behaves in that way, there is harmony, according to them. But one nice thing about the Confucian philosophy, of course, is that it's a humanist philosophy. There is no God, no vengeful God or capricious God. It's totally humanist philosophy. It doesn't even have a concept of guilt. And he discards the belief in spirits. He didn't really like it. He said, don't worry about them. Just behave ethically and everything will be fine. Don't worry about the evil spirits, which is nice. It's a very humanistic philosophy. And I believe that the evil spirits is the origin of acupuncture. I don't believe in the modern Chinese explanation. Acupuncture was discovered by trial and error through massage. Like you have a headache here, you press that point and it's relieved. The following week, there's a headache there, and you press this point, it's also relieved. A month later, you have the same headache, you press this point, it's also relieved. Then you connect the points together and you make a channel. Okay? I think acupuncture is very much a demonic type of medicine. I really do. And it still is. And that's why I think it's impossible to do clinical trials in acupuncture. It's easier with herbal medicine. Because acupuncture is totally subjective, individual. And it depends on the time you do it and who does it. They do a clinical trial in acupuncture and say, we used these points, it didn't work. But who was doing it? Who was doing it? How was his or her Shen at the time? Acupuncture is a demonic medicine. It really is a shamanistic medicine. And in my opinion, that's the origin of it. These shamans used to go around villages fending the air with their arrows. And in my opinion, one day they started piercing the body to get the evil spirits out. I think it's a very logical consequence of it. If you look at the character of medicine, he has the character, the radical for to take out. And interestingly, the Chinese character for acupuncture point is a hole, a cave. And the evil spirits used to hide in caves. I think it's very logical. That's and the vocabulary of acupuncture. So this is one of the big metaphors of Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine is a system of metaphors. This is one of them, the spirits, the evil spirits. And if you look at the terminology of acupuncture, Xie Qi, for example, what we call pathogenic factor, in the old times wasn't called pathogenic factor, it was called Xie Qi. And this Xie here means evil. And Xie Qi originally was Xie Gui, an evil spirit. So the pathogenic factor, dampness, is an evil spirit, and so is phlegm and blood stasis and liver qi stagnation. Other characters. This is the statement from the Neijing, which proves the transition from demonic medicine to natural medicine. Chipo asks the Yellow Emperor, why is it in the old times people lived to 100 and nowadays live to 50? And the Chipo doesn't say it's because they're invaded by evil spirits. He says that's because of their lifestyle. I.e., evil spirits are not the cause of disease anymore. It's your lifestyle. And it specifically says, nowadays people drink wine as if it were rice gruel, regard wrong as right. Notice this ethical thing. Notice that. That's Confucian. See, what's it got to do with health? It's an ethical problem, not a medical problem. regard wrong as right, and seek sexual pleasure after drinking heavily. As a result, their jing is exhausted and jiangqi is wasted. They don't know how to regulate their shen, giving way to sensual pleasures. And those are the causes of disease. Sex, diet, excessive desire, etc. Not the evil spirits. But the belief in evil spirits never disappeared. Even the greatest Chinese doctors, Li Shizhen, Sun Simiao, they're all very comfortable with doing acupuncture, herbal medicine, and at the same time, just to make sure it works, do incantations to drive out the evil spirits. Chinese people are very pragmatic. That's why we are horrified when they put steroids in the skin cream, but to them it's normal. Why not? You know what I mean? Or aspirin with yin chao san. Why not? You know, if you see it from that point of view. Of course, we can find many reasons why not, but if you look at it rationally, why not? Make sure that it works. Use both. So the natural medicine and the shamanistic medicine based on evil spirits develop in parallel. And that's why Unschuld criticizes us. We kind of ignore it, the bits we don't like about the evil spirits. And even the greatest doctors did it. Like, for example, this is from a book by Unschuld, actually, by the way. And that's Sun Simiao, who's recommending this treatment for eye diseases. Find a tree where sparrows rest at twilight, beat on something so they rise an alarm. When the sparrows fly off, you say this exorcism, and they will cure your eye disease. And this is the great Sun Simiao. It's not a little village shaman. It's the great Dr. Sun Simiao. At the same time as using acupuncture and herbal medicine. At the same time. This is what I was saying earlier about the terminology of acupuncture showing the influence of evil spirits. This is wind stroke, is an arrow hitting the target. So an evil spirit that hits you and you get a stroke. That's pathogenic factor, which we've already seen. The card for disease, this one, G, is a man lying in bed hit by an arrow. That's Xie. That's a card used for the five elements, Cheng, to seize, and that's evil spirits. So that's one of the metaphors of Chinese medicine, ghosts and evil spirits, the Gui spirits. These are the great doctors Sun Simiao and Li Shizhen, both of whom used what Unschuld calls demonic medicine. But interestingly, later on, many doctors kind of blended the two. And they said, yes, evil spirits exist, but they invade you because your jiangqi is weak. So they combine the two. They say, yes, they do exist, but they may even be a product of your own mind, and they invade you when you're weak. If you have yang shu, you're invaded by cold. If you have deficiency of the shen, you're invaded by evil spirits. So evil spirits became a pathogenic factor like cold, or dampness, or wind. And there is even in the Neijing, there is a chapter, it's a very interesting paragraph here, that actually criticizes the belief in evil spirits. It says there are situations when there is no apparent pathogenic factor, and yet the patient falls ill. Is it due to invasion of evil spirits? And Chipo answers that this is not. This condition is due to the retention of pathogenic factor that has not come forth yet, i.e. what we will call latent heat. So notice, even in the Neijing, very ancient times, there is this idea that people may wrongly attribute a disease to evil spirits when it's actually due to a latent pathogenic factor. Okay, let's look at the Hunan Po briefly. This is what Jiang Zhebin says about evil spirits. They even relate the color of the evil spirits to your body condition. If your liver is deficient, you see white spirits. If your heart is deficient, you see black spirits, etc., etc. That's in the co-cycle. And those are the points to use, which interestingly are the Yuan points of the Yang channel and the back shu point of the Yin channel. So it's a very kind of natural view of evil spirits. But let's look at the most interesting part of it, of Gui in a psychological sense. This character for Gui is inside the Hun and Po. These are the Hun and Po, which are called ethereal soul and corporeal soul. And the Hun is Yang in comparison to the Po, which is Yin. And crucially, the Hun survives after death. The Po goes back to earth. And the fact that both Hun and Po have the Gui character within them says a lot. What does it say? What it says there in red. In my opinion, it shows that the Hun and Po have an independent existence from the Shen, Yi, and Je. If you look at this, let's look at these first. We'll go back in a moment. It's like that, in my opinion. If you look at the 5-element diagram, you see the Shen, the Yi, Je, Po, and Hun, etc., right? So they're all equal if you look at the 5-element diagram, right? The 5 spirits or the 5 Shens. But in reality, they're like that. Shen, Yi, and Je are together. Yi and Je are sub-aspects of the Shen. And that is what I call the self, the I, consciousness. Consciousness. Including our emotional life. Hun and Po are down there. Why are they down there? Because they are Gui. They have their own independent existence. One psychological, the other bodily, corporeal. And that's crucial in order to understand. And in my opinion, this is an incredibly, if you look at it from a modern psychological point of view, it's an incredibly clever insight that the ancient Chinese had, in my opinion. And it's very tempting to say that the Hun would correspond to what Jung's unconscious, Freud's and Jung unconscious. I always hesitate in making such direct connections. It's always dangerous, but it is tempting to do that. This is consciousness, also memory, including our emotional life, cognition, and volition. And I repeat, Yi and Je are sub-aspects of it. And memory is a very important aspect of it. Memory is a very important aspect of our self. Interestingly, when the ancient Chinese talk a lot about memory, the Shen controls memory, the Yi controls memory, the Je controls memory, all three of them. There's an overlap. But memory has, besides meaning the ability to remember facts or a telephone number, it means much more. The memory is an essential part in which our self exists. Okay. And the Hun and Po have their own independent existence. The Po physical and the Hun on a psychic level. So what does that mean, independent existence on a psychic level? And this diagram here indicates it. It means the Hun is an essential part in which the Shen works. Without Shen, the Hun would be like a computer without software. The Hun is the software, the Shen is the computer. The Hun gives the Shen that movement. You remember the squiggles of the Gui? The Hun is always moving. Moving in a psychological sense means what? This is a statement that occurs in all the books. Sui Shen Wang Lai Wei Je Hun. What follows the Shen in its coming and going is the Hun. Moving means what? It means these 5 things. In dreams at night, when you dream at night, is due to the activity of the Hun. More importantly, life dreams. When you decided to study acupuncture, you were weighing whether to study Chinese medicine or not. That desire, that idea comes from the Hun, not the Shen. The Shen has to evaluate it, but that comes from the Hun. And the Hun, the movement of the Hun towards the Shen is essential in relationship with the outside world. An autistic child is locked in his world because the Hun is not moving. The Hun is not giving the Shen that movement. By contrast, a hyperactive child, the Hun is moving too much. And that's what makes him hyperactive. Responsive for ideas, plans, and projects, and also artistic creativity and inspiration comes from the Hun, not the Shen. And all that, why? Because the Hun has the nature of Gui. It is independent. As I stand here lecturing, my Shen, Yi, and Zhi are working. But in the background, the Hun is in the background with its own agenda, its own aims. And very quickly before we break, I wanted to show you this diagram, indicating the relationship between Shen and Hun. That's the normal relationship. You see all those arrows coming out of the Hun? Because the Hun is moving, is always searching. The Hun is full of ideas, but the Shen has to control them a little bit. There's only one arrow coming out. The Shen can only deal with one at a time. And this is what happens when you're manic. There's all those arrows coming out of the Hun and all those arrows coming out of the Shen. That makes you a little bit manic. Not necessarily mania in a full-blown sense of bipolar disorder, but mania occurs in many different degrees, also mild degrees. It's very common in California. Or this is when the person is depressed. Notice there's only one arrow coming off the Hun. The Hun is not moving enough. And hence there is nothing coming out of the Shen. And the person is depressed, can't relate. Okay, I'm told my time is up, so we'll continue in the afternoon. And as I said, thank you.